I was driving back home late at night after visiting a friend in a small town about 3 hours away. The road was long and empty, cutting through fields and patches of forest, with no other cars in sight. I wasn't too worried at first. I had plenty of gas, my music was playing, and I was used to driving alone. But after an hour or so, I noticed my fuel gauge dropping way faster than it should. I was sure I had at least half a tank left when I started, but now the needle was hovering near empty. I hadn't seen a gas station in miles, and my GPS wasn't showing any nearby. Just as I started to panic, I spotted a dimly lit gas station on the side of the road. It looked old, almost abandoned. The lights on the canopy flickered, and the signage was faded and unreadable. There were 2 pumps, and one looked like it hadn't worked in decades. But I didn't have a choice. I pulled in, rolled down my window, and looked around. The air smelled strange, like burnt rubber mixed with something metallic. I pressed the button for service, and after a few seconds, a man stepped out from the small building attached to the station. He didn't say a word, just walked over to my car. His uniform was stained with grease, and his face was blank, almost distant. Something about him felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. I asked him to fill the tank, but he didn't respond, just started pumping gas without looking at me. I tried making small talk, asking if the station was open 24/7, but he barely reacted. The only sound was the clicking of the pump and the faint hum of the flickering lights. I felt uneasy, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. I glanced at the price meter, but it wasn't moving. That was weird. I leaned forward slightly to get a better look, and my stomach dropped. The nozzle wasn't even connected to my car. He was just standing there, pretending to pump gas into an empty space. My hands went cold. "Hey, I think there's something wrong with the pump," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. He just stood there, his hand on the nozzle, staring at the side of my car. That's when I noticed something else, the station's glass window behind him. There was a reflection, but it wasn't his. It was mine, the car, the pump, but where he should have been, there was nothing. No reflection at all. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. I slammed the car into reverse, my tires screeching as I pulled away. The man didn't move. He just stood there, holding the nozzle in midair, staring straight ahead. My headlights barely lit the road ahead, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I checked my fuel gauge again, and somehow, it was back where it had been before I stopped. Half a tank, like I had never gotten out of the car in the first place. I drove for what felt like an eternity before spotting another gas station, a newer one with bright lights and a convenience store. I pulled in, parked, and just sat there, my hands shaking. The clerk inside was talking to a customer, normal and alive, like nothing was wrong with the world. I stepped out, desperate for some sense of reality, and went inside. I don't know why I did it, but I asked the clerk if he knew about that old gas station down the road. He frowned. "There's no gas station out there. Hasn't been one for years. It was torn down after a fire, back in the 90s, I think." I felt sick. My skin prickled, and I suddenly felt the urge to check my car, like I expected something to be wrong with it. But it was fine, no gas smell, no weird marks, nothing. Like I had imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. I knew I had pulled into that station. I saw that man. I felt the air shift around me, the way you feel when something is watching you. I never took that route again. Even thinking about it now makes my stomach turn. I don't know what happened that night. Maybe I stopped at a place that shouldn't exist. Maybe I met someone who never really left. All I know is, I've never trusted my fuel gauge since. I was on a long road trip, far away from the usual highways. When I decided to stop at a gas station, I spotted off to the side. It seemed like the perfect place to take a break and refuel. As I pulled up, I noticed the place was eerily quiet. The pumps were old, and the building looked like it hadn't seen a person in years. There wasn't a single car around, and I didn't see a single soul, which I thought was odd for a gas station, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I got out of the car and walked to the pump. The screen lit up automatically, and the fuel started pumping without me needing to press any buttons or do anything. I figured it was some kind of automated system they had, though it felt off. I finished filling up, but still no sign of anyone. No frontista, no cars driving by, nothing. I went to the small building to check out the payment system. The door was unlocked, and a machine inside asked me to insert my card. I did, and just like the pump, it processed the payment without a single person being present. It felt like I was in a ghost town or something, but I convinced myself that maybe it was just a quiet time for the station. The air was thick with silence, and the longer I stayed, the more uncomfortable I felt. When I stepped outside, I felt an odd chill in the air. It wasn't cold, but there was something unsettling about the place. As I looked around, I noticed that the gas station was completely covered in overgrown plants. Vines were creeping up the walls, and weeds had overtaken the pavement. It was as if nature had taken over everything. I looked around for any sign of life, but there was nothing. It felt like I had stumbled into a place where time had stood still, or perhaps time had simply forgotten. The whole station seemed abandoned, yet strangely functional. I got back in my car quickly, trying not to overthink it, but my gut told me something was off. I glanced at the gas meter, full, no issues. As I started the engine, I took one last look at the station. Even though it was silent and still, something about it felt like it was watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there. The way the vines curled around the pumps made it look like the station had been out of service for decades, yet everything worked perfectly. It was a mystery I couldn't solve, but I was too eager to leave to linger any longer. As I drove away, I kept looking in my rearview mirror, expecting to see the station disappear behind me. But I didn't expect the feeling of dread that grew as I put more distance between us. My mind raced with thoughts about what I'd just seen. A gas station that operated on its own. No employees, no customers, just an automated system in a place that looked like it hadn't been used in years. I kept driving, trying to brush it off as some kind of weird fluke. I even convinced myself that I was just imagining things. But the more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Weeks later, I found myself driving down the same stretch of road again. The trip was routine, and I didn't think much of it until I reached the spot where the gas station had been. My eyes scanned the area, and my heart sank. The station was gone. There wasn't even a trace of it. No broken pumps, no crumbling walls, not even the overgrown plants. The area was completely empty, like nothing had ever been there. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking. It didn't make sense. I remembered exactly where I had stopped. I knew it was real. I drove slowly, trying to convince myself that maybe I was mistaken, that I had stopped at a different location, but the road was familiar. There was no other gas station in sight, no building or structure of any kind. I even drove up and down the stretch a few more times, convinced I had missed something. But every time I passed through, it was like the gas station had been erased from existence. It wasn't just gone, it was like it had never been there at all. The feeling of unease grew as I drove further, but I couldn't shake the image of that empty stretch of road, where a gas station used to stand. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of weird illusion, maybe a mirage or some strange coincidence. But nothing about that place had felt right, from the way the pumps had worked by themselves to the way everything seemed off. It was like a place suspended in time, and now it was gone. When I got home, I told a few friends about what happened. They listened, of course, but none of them seemed as unsettled as I was. I even Googled the area to see if there were any records of the station, but I couldn't find anything. No mention of a fire, no news stories about an accident, nothing. It was as if it had never existed. I started doubting my own memory. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was it all just a strange coincidence? But deep down, I knew what I saw. That station had been real, even if it no longer existed. I've driven down that road many times since, and I've never seen anything like it again. There's nothing there now, just an empty stretch of land that doesn't seem to hold any history. But sometimes late at night, I think about that place, and I wonder what happened to it. Why was it there? Why did it disappear without a trace? It's been months now, and I still can't make sense of it. It doesn't feel like a dream or a trick of the mind. It feels like something I was never meant to see. And every time I drive past that spot, I can't help but feel like I'm being watched, like there's something waiting there, something I'll never understand. I don't know if I'll ever find out what happened, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it's still out there, hidden in plain sight. I was driving through a remote part of the country when I saw a gas station up ahead. It looked like the perfect place to stop for a quick refuel. The area was desolate, with nothing else in sight for miles. As I pulled in, I noticed how isolated the place seemed. The building was old, the pumps rusty, and everything about it felt abandoned, though it was still open. I didn't think much of it at first, just a quiet stop in the middle of nowhere. I parked next to the pump and stepped out of the car. The attendant, an older man with a tired expression, walked over to me without saying a word. He didn't seem bothered by the silence, and I almost felt like I was disturbing his peace by being there. He began to fill my car without a single glance my way, almost mechanical in his movements. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. It was a strange, unsettling quiet, as if the air around me was thick with something unsaid. I got back into the car, thinking that maybe I was just overthinking it. After all, I had been driving for hours and was likely tired. But then I noticed something strange. The mirror on the car was reflecting the scene behind me, but it wasn't right. The image was distorted. I could see the reflection of the gas station, but it looked warped, like the edges of the building were bending in unnatural ways. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was just exhausted. But as I stared longer, the distortion became more pronounced. It wasn't just the station, it was me. My reflection was moving differently, like a version of me from the future, and every time I glanced away and back again, something else had changed. I leaned forward, trying to make sense of it. In the reflection, I saw myself older, my face marked with lines, my expression dark. The changes weren't immediate, but subtle, like they were unfolding right before my eyes. The more I looked, the more I could feel my heart rate increasing, as if the image in the mirror was trying to tell me something I couldn't understand. I turned my head to look behind me, but there was nothing there, just the wind rustling the empty parking lot. When I looked back in the mirror, my reflection had changed again. This time, my expression was angry, like I was about to lash out. I felt my stomach drop as I continued to watch my reflection. I looked away, trying to shake off the unease, but when I glanced back at the mirror, I could see something different, a shadow, almost like a figure, standing behind me. My heart raced. I quickly turned around, but there was no one there. The parking lot was empty, not a single soul in sight, and yet my reflection was showing a figure I couldn't see with my own eyes. The sensation of being watched, of not being alone, crept over me like a cold wind. I finally looked back at the attendant, who had finished filling my car. He was staring at me now, his eyes locked onto mine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew exactly what was happening. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just watching me with that same unreadable expression. I opened my mouth to ask him what was going on, to ask about the reflection in my mirror, but before I could get a word out, he suddenly spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "No one should be here after sundown." His words sent a chill through me. It felt like an ominous warning, like he was trying to tell me something important, but I couldn't quite grasp it. I tried to ask him what he meant, to press for more details, but as I opened my mouth to speak, he turned and walked away. Just like that, he was gone. 1 second, he was standing by my car, and the next, it was as if he had vanished into thin air. I looked around in confusion, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The station was completely silent again, the only sound the soft rustling of the wind. I didn't know what to do. The car was full, my payment had been processed automatically, and now the attendant was gone. But I couldn't just leave, not when everything felt so wrong. I glanced once more at the mirror. This time, the distortion was almost overwhelming. My reflection was no longer just a version of me, it was changing. There were flashes of things I couldn't explain. It was as though I was seeing multiple futures, multiple versions of myself, all of them growing more frantic and desperate as they played out in the mirror. I didn't want to look anymore. I wanted to leave, but the engine wouldn't start. I turned the key several times, my hands trembling, but it was like the car was refusing to start. That's when I felt the air get colder, a sharp breeze sweeping through the lot. I kept trying to start the engine, my heart racing now, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my back. I glanced at the mirror again, almost afraid to see what might be there. To my horror, I saw myself, one final version of me, standing just behind my car, staring at me. With a sudden jolt, the car's engine roared to life, and I sped out of there as fast as I could. I didn't look back. As I drove away, the feeling of dread and confusion lingered, and I couldn't shake the thought of what I had seen. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but something about that gas station, that attendant, and that reflection still haunts me to this day. I never went back, and I never will.